7 past the hour. Here with us now, medical correspondent for PBS's Need to Know, Dr. Emily Sine. Emily, good to see you.
Good morning.
And Pulitzer Prize-nominated national correspondent for the New York Times, Alan Schwartz, who recently wrote about Richard Fee, a young man who committed suicide in late 2011. Richard had an addiction to Adderall, a medication for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. And Alan's article reads in part this: Richard Fee's experience included it all: conversations with friends and family members, and a review of detailed medical records depict an intelligent and articulate young man lying to doctor after doctor, physicians issuing hasty diagnoses, and psychiatrists continuing to prescribe medication, even increasing dosages despite evidence of his growing addiction and psychiatric breakdown. Any step along the way, someone could have helped him. They were just handing out drugs, says Richard's father. People have to know that kids are out there getting these drugs and getting addicted to them, and doctors are helping them do it.
And part of the problem, and the reason why I wanted for us to have this conversation, is because I've seen it with my son's friends and their friends of friends of friends. It is unbelievable. And part of the problem, doctor, is the fact that psychiatrists now,
that's a great piece,
they get reimbursed not for sitting in counseling. They get reimbursed for getting people in and out of their office as quickly as possible and prescribing medication. That's what they do now. And a lot of times they prescribe it on a whim. I've heard the story 100 times.
I can't say that that's not true. That happens for sure. And certainly in this terrible, tragic story that Alan describes in a heartbreaking way, this was a disaster. I mean, this was a fail on every level, particularly since the information got back to the doctors that were prescribing that this was a kid who was really in the throes of a terrible addiction. And so there was a lot of problems on down the line. It wasn't just the initial diagnosis and the prescription. It was repeated failures to sort of catch this kid who was so terribly addicted.
Alan, this is a growing epidemic at college campuses across America. Prescription abuse is rampant, and kids are dying. Kids are dying. It would shock Americans to know how many kids are overdosing, whether it's Adderall, whether it's Oxycontin. Like, some kids do a combination of it, and they're on Adderall, and then they go into Oxycontin to come off the Adderall, and then the Adderall stops working, they fall off a cliff, and they stop breathing in their sleep. This is happening all across America.
Well, for every time something like that happens, there are thousands of other cases of kids who are taking the Adderall or being prescribed the Adderall when it's quite likely they do not have the disorder for which Adderall is typically prescribed.
Right.
One thing that's very important for us to note, and I'm sure, Doctor, you would agree, that Adderall and other ADHD medications, when prescribed appropriately for the disorder that they are designed, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, they can be very safe, they can be very effective, they can be lifesavers, not life takers. The problem is when that process is misused, either by the doctor not paying attention or by the patient who is lying in order to get the equivalent of free cocaine.
Right.
Then you've got problems. Okay, so it's important to make a distinction between those who have the disorder legitimately and need the medicine and shouldn't be demonized, and those who really don't.
And we get kids that start popping Adderall when they get close to finals.
Yeah.
Or when they're studying for big exams. It's happening.
Well, and I think another part of this is just so these kids aren't junkies. These kids aren't, caught in back alleys.
It's a different type of junkie.
It is a different type of junkie.
I guess my point is the stereotype. These are good kids and in this example, the parents brought them up as well as they could. My point is, when you're addicted to something, you will say anything. You can be the nicest, sweetest, most well-educated, well-brought-up person, but if you're addicted to one of these drugs, you will do what it takes to get them.
And make no mistake, they are polite, they're well-behaved, they come from the right families, and they are junkies. And we live in a culture, I
should have put it in quotes.
Tom Wolfe, Mike Barnacle said this. I remember reading this back in the late 90s. Tom Wolfe said, we have the most affluent generation of all time and the most over-medicated generation at the same time. And kids are dying left and right.
Well, as Alan points out, for the right people, this is a terrific drug. I can't imagine there is another drug, though, that is more overprescribed and more easily prescribed than Adderall. And I worry about parental addiction to Adderall in the sense that your kid is trying to get into high school, into a testing high school, or trying to get into college, didn't do that well in the SATs. And someone says, geez, I don't think he concentrates well. Oh, let's get him some Adderall.
Right.
By the way, though, this didn't just start in 2012 or 2013.
It's been
Do you
going
remember?
on.
Because you've got kids.
Yeah.
Mother's little helper.
Hell, your kids,
That's what it
by the way,
was.
Mike, you've got like 87
Yes, that's what
kids.
it is, too.
But starting in the early 1990s, every time we would take our children in, and there were any problems, what would they say? Oh, the attention deficit, here, give them Ritalin.
One thing I think we all must responsibly do, though, is acknowledge that for a certain percentage of American children, whether it's 3 or 5 or 7, well, not that it works on anybody. That's like saying, hey, put on these platform shoes, see if it makes you taller. Okay? The thing is that there's 3, 5, 7%, whatever it is, of kids who have a legitimate disorder with dopamine transmission, et cetera, for which this medicine is very appropriate when handled by an appropriate and responsible physician and or parent.
And there may be a certain percentage of kids who need it and are not getting it.
Absolutely.
So there's two problems at either end of the spectrum.
But what that means mathematically, and I'm a bit of a math geek, is that means that probably half the kids in the United States diagnosed with ADHD do not meet DSM-4 criteria for the disorder. And name another disorder for which we medicate with controlled substances that we accept that level of.
Mike, I want to confirm really quickly, and then we're going to do a statement from the drug companies. But did you get that with your kids growing up too?
Absolutely.
It was constant. It was not just the doctors.
Beginning about
it was
age
the
13,
teachers.
14.
It was the principals. It was the counselors. You heard Ritalin. Now you're hearing Adderall, and I agree completely. There are a small percentage of the population, Mika, that Adderall works. But I'll tell you what, it's causing a lot more damage right now because it's been overprescribed. It's our culture now.
Here's the statement from, is it Teva Pharmaceuticals? Adderall is a Schedule II controlled substance, and the package insert clearly states the risks associated with incorrect dosage, misuse, or abuse, and recommends that doctors properly monitor patients. This medicine is not recommended for patients with a history of drug abuse. Adderall is one of the many prescription drugs subject to abuse.
Well, it comes under the imprimatur of a physician's prescription pad.
Yeah.
So people, I think, have a reduced level of suspicion about how dangerous this drug can be, and I think that's what this poor kid in Alan's piece kept saying. The doctor wrote me the prescription. It must be okay.
Okay, that's correct.
And it gives you a certain sense of security if it's coming through a physician. But somewhere it's been lost that these can be dangerously addictive. And although his case I think is rare, we would agree with that.
But the reason that it was instructive is not in how it ended, but how it evolved.
How it evolved.
It wasn't the fact that he killed himself, tragic as that is. It's what led him to the point where he would consider something like that.
Let me just say, again, having kids, I've got a 25-year-old, a 22-year-old, and a lot of friends and a lot of friends of friends of friends of friends of friends. Maybe the ending is rare. The story is being played out on every single college campus, and it is so widespread.
And high school now.
And high school now.
Real tough high
The
schools.
abuse of prescription medications, and it seems safer because it comes from mom or dad's cabinet, or mom or dad say, go to this doctor, you're having a problem in school, they can handle it. And again, they rush into a psychiatrist's office. The psychiatrist is not getting paid to sit there and listen to them for 30 minutes and then make a judgment. Again, I've heard it time and time again. They make crack judgments, look at them 5 minutes, go, this is your problem. Here, let me write your prescription.
Some do. Some handle it that way. Some are very good, but unfortunately there are too many who are not.
Some are very good, but the problem is the pay structure does not reward doctors for sitting in an office and talking to a kid for 30 to 45 minutes, trying to figure it out and having these callbacks.
Dr. Emily Sine, great to see you.
Good to see you.
Even under these circumstances and this topic. Come back soon. Alan Schwartz, thank you as well. Incredible piece.
Thank you.
Up next, Business Before the Bell with Brian Sullivan. We'll be right back.
A new day, a new way, and new eyes to see it all.